But at the end of the day, having created this public opinion, having created this consensus between a number of people around this idea or around this tactic of activism, you still have to transfer that to the real. So a telephone is not a substitute for work. You know, you call people and arrange for a meeting with them, and then you have to do the. You could still do the meeting, you know, but at the end, you would have to produce something in the physical world. But of course, if you amplify your opinion or idea or ideal or cause or demand using this social media, then you can, in a very short period of time, you can actually challenge the makers of media, even if they try to disseminate opposite or contra information. And I argue that this revolution has seen the formation of a collective mind, of a large number of people having the same ideas, the same demands, and that formation of collective mind was very much facilitated by the media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, blogs, but also things like Al Jazeera or other news organizations or news broadcasters, which people were still getting information and sharing information, to the extent that when the regime decided to sort of cut communications, so they cut the mobiles, they stopped the mobile service, they stopped the internet for 5 days. But at that point, that collective mind has already created its own neural network. So even if people didn't have Facebook or Twitter or mobile or blogs, or people still would find alternative means, because that kind of unity has already happened. So people maybe would talk in the street, would talk in the mosque, or would look at the Jazeera or some other news agency, and so that purpose was there, and people would just start finding another parallel neural channel to channel information. And in fact, some people argue that people would rush to the square as soon as they felt that communication was not possible. So that was a motivation for many people. First, they got very angry, and secondly, they thought, okay, if we can't communicate, then we have to meet at the last place we met. So let's go to Tahrir, or let's go to that square, because almost every city or almost every governorate had its own Tahrir Square. It wasn't just Tahrir Square. So people just go to the square to meet their, to be a part of the movement and create that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and so sort of seeing the combination of the role that social media did play in providing this alternate route to kind of building this general group consensus, but then obviously putting it into play with action. Wow, really, I'll have to think about that a bit more. It's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing also. It was also a tool of mobilization. So not only was it a tool for information, it was a tool for mobilization. So if you wanted to know, we would literally, we're going from, we've been attacked, by the CSF, which is a Central Security Forces in this area, and we're moving to another area. So we would see it, and the police would see it as well. So, but in the hope that we attract more people. So it was also a mobilization tool. So it's not only a tool of discussion and so on, just like you're letting everybody else know that we're meeting in this area, or that this person has been attacked, or this person has been detained. So it was a mobilization area. It was also an emergency tool to try to sort of provide support for those who've been arrested or detained or injured or killed, or that you need supplies, medical supplies to this area, or you need food, or something. So it was a wonderful tool to use, but it is not a substitute for doing things. It's actually facilitates doing it, like the computer. The computer is great, but you still would have to use it. Exactly. Absolutely.
Okay. Very, very interesting. Yeah. Thank you for your thoughts on that. One of the other topics that I wanted to discuss with you, which very kind of topical right now, was what kind of comment or response you had to what went on earlier in the year with the detention of Sam Lahoud and several other American activists who were in Egypt working for several American NGOs, and how that played out. And I mean, obviously, the American government having a relationship with the Egyptian government, particularly with Mubarak and his former regime, and obviously trying to figure their way through this regime change. How did that play out in kind of Egyptian domestic media? How was it perceived by the general public, by Egyptian NGOs? Because my understanding is that while the Americans who were detained received a lot of media attention in the American press, there were also Egyptians from those NGOs who were detained as well.
Absolutely. From what I heard is that these organizations have been, and we've seen these organizations working in Egypt since, maybe 2004, 2005. Mm-hmm. So these organizations came, and they were invited, in fact, mm-hmm. by the NDP, the National Democratic Party, and at that time that Gamal Mubarak was making regular visits to the U.S. and meeting with this organization and trying to sell himself and his crew, mm-hmm. As being the new thought or the new paradigm in Egypt, and that they represent, the sort of a new generation of reformers, mm-hmm. In Egypt and so on. So I think they were invited in the first place mm-hmm. by the old regime. They came, they applied to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs received their applications, and they said it was a matter of time that they could actually practice their mm-hmm. Activities. And they've been doing that since 2005. We met them in many occasions. They held training, and to various parties participated in these sort of training sessions.
Because they were doing a lot of, I think they called it like democracy building, and like working with groups to kind of train them in political activities and how to participate in a political system. This is what I
think it was like most of their work was training parties on like campaigning elections.
Okay.
The most of their activities, as far as I know, was with the parties, with political parties, just helping these parties how to raise your capacity, how to organize campaigns, how to develop messages. So it was purely, from what I see, was purely technical in capacity building training. Bringing, sharing with people from maybe various experiences, emerging democracies, and so on. So that's the extent of their assistance. I've never heard, for instance, that these organizations were giving money to any parties or interfering in the political process in any way. So they were just like, a training, a resource to train people, to help people raise their capacity. I know that virtually all the parties, being Islamist or socialist or liberals or otherwise, they were approached by these organizations, and almost without exception that these parties benefited from these training sessions and these technical assistance. But I look at this, and many activists look at this in a different fashion. I think that during the revolution, during the early days of the revolution, we had this temporary meeting of minds between the revolution and SCAF, being the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. The revolution wanted to change the regime, and it's so that changing Mubarak was a big symbol of changing that regime, but the main aim was to change the regime from one of oppression, of control, of really authoritarianism, to one of democracy, of freedom, of liberty, and so on.
So, I mean, really sort of whole system change.
Absolutely, yes. So the revolution, or the revolutionaries, wanted to remove Mubarak in order to change the regime. But SCAF at one point, I think, decided that the only way to save the regime was to remove Mubarak. And So at that point, it was that sort of meeting of minds. But obviously, there are two different directions. One is like, let's change the regime, and the other, let's remove Mubarak to try to preserve the regime, preserve as much as possible of the regime, preserve the controls, and that was, I think, that was a big, problem which started to part paths. So going to different directions after that. Yeah. And from what I saw, that the regime started to retaliate against the revolution, and so it would publicly embrace the revolution and say, this is a great thing that happened to Egypt, and the people of Egypt, and the great youth movement, and all these things. But then they would come at each faction of the revolution, start to demonize or arrest or combat or fight or destroy that faction in one way or another, discredit. So, it starts with the 6th of April movement. It starts accusation. 6th of April movement, they're receiving, funding from overseas. They've been trained in Serbia. They're being subversives in this way, and start like really demonize the movement. Although, 6th of April movement is like a very patriotic movement, and its contribution to the revolution since 2008 till today, cannot be denied. So if you really embrace the revolution, you have to really give a lot of credit to the 6th of April movement, and in fact bring the maybe leaders from that movement and sit down with and start looking at how can we go forward. This revolution, you embrace the revolution. These are the people of the revolution, or part of the people of the revolution. So you have to sit with them and think, how can we get forward from here? We do the same thing with the Baradei and the Baradei campaign and the Baradei supporters, and say, Baradei, he's an American or European, whatever, agent, and he wants to destroy Egypt or to destabilize a country, and his daughter wears so and so, and he drinks this and he does this, and start focusing on on really irrelevant things, and actually spreading lies about the guy, and so and then move to the the socialists, they really want to upset the social balance, and they want to destabilize the country. These guys, the anarchists, they want to destabilize the state, and they want to bring down not the regime, but they want to bring down the state. So they just move down first to say, we believe in the revolution, we embrace the revolution, but then try to discredit every faction that would had anything to do with the revolution. So in what sense, in what way do you actually support the revolution? If all these components, all these revolutionaries are bad, from the liberals who are agents to the West, to the socialists, to the anarchists, to the revolutionists, to the movements which are not necessarily ideological. So which part of the revolution to support? It's obviously that reveals that in fact it was that support was very limited to the support of removing Mubarak and that all. So I see that the NGO campaign was a part of that retaliation. So the NGOs, they helped in a way to spread awareness and in a way support activists with training, with technical knowledge, or just the fact that some of these activists will be associated or affiliated with this organization, maybe some of them working there, some of them volunteering there, or whatever. So that was I see this as a part of a bigger plot to discredit the Egyptian revolution, and the attack on the NGOs, the IRI and NDI and others, is not directed towards the Americans. It is directed towards the Egyptians who may have had training or affiliation or some worked or met or in any way. So I don't see it as an attack on the American organizations at all. To the extent I was leading a study group at Harvard University in the Institute of Politics, and that as a problem was happening, and the people are very concerned about the Americans. I said, this is a bluff. It has nothing to do with the Americans. The real aim here is to actually attack the Egyptians, and be assured that no harm will happen to any of the Americans. And the main aim is to actually discredit the Egyptian activists in media terms, and if possible, also maybe throw some of them in jail, or have them harassed by trials and stuff like that. And that's exactly what happened. Yeah. So after a while, we found that the Americans left the country. The Americans, being tried or being, which is good, because I think it's. I don't wish anybody to be tried if there's no case in the first place. But when you look at this from the people's perspectives, how the media played this, that the United States exerted pressure and the Americans were released.
Yeah.
The way I look at it is that it wasn't the Americans in the first place who were targeted. So it's very natural that the SCAF and the government and the regime wants to maintain friendly relations with the Americans, and the Americans were not their target in the first place. Their target were the Egyptians. Perhaps they want to send a message in the future to the international organizations, including some European organizations, also German organizations, that don't support democracy, don't help the activists, because otherwise you could be brought to trial. Don't get involved. But the main message and the main enemy to these people are not the Americans, because obviously we've seen that they release the Americans and they have no problems with them anymore. But it is the activists, it is the revolution, it is another systematic part of trying to discredit the revolution and try to demonize the revolution before the Egyptian people. And they've used so many tools for that, like blaming sort of economic problems in the revolution, blaming security, and they would actually, we've seen that they release prisoners, release convicted prisoners from jail in order to, so we have like 60,000 prisoners who are at large, and obviously some of them or many of them are probably responsible for some of the security problems that we have, that the police, in fact, kind of totally pulled out from doing its job. So all of these, I see all of these are like part of the bigger picture, that the regime is trying to demonize the revolution, to try to create a situation of fear, a situation of insecurity, so that, try to blame this all on the revolution, so that people will come back and say, okay, we don't want democracy, we want security, we don't want our freedoms, but we want to have, jobs, and so they have to have this unfair choice. So you either choose the economy and security and this, or, chaos and freedom and democracy. Is this what you want? So that's a situation. I think we have people trying to, once more retain that paradigm of control.
Fantastic. I mean, and that was very much what I was hoping to hear, was sort of more about the domestic politics and how you see these different groups currently vying for, feet in the door and control over certain elements of what's going on. And I mean, during the protest, during the revolution, you saw a lot of discussion about the differences between like the military and the police and how the different groups were responding. And I was just wondering, obviously, in the aftermath, yes, there's SCAF retained control for quite a while. Then there were some elections, and now you're seeing what some people are calling sort of a breakdown of order in Egypt at certain different times. You're seeing an increase in attacks on Copts, or maybe it's just being reported in the media more. And then more recently, the death of the Coptic Pope Shenouda. I'm sure I mispronounced his name. And also the football riots that happened last month. And I was just wondering how, that coupled with kind of the actions against NGOs, who very much were, part of these activists, these people who were trained, who were interested in providing some kind of, political support to opposition parties and structure within those. How are all of these events linked? Is it kind of painting a certain picture of domestic politics in Egypt and what might be taking place in the lead up to the presidential elections later this year?
Well, I would start with the football rights, and as you called it, in Port Said. One of the reasons, or one of the strengths of this revolution, was to actually mobilize what we call the ultras. So these ultras are the fans of football, and we have like two main bodies of ultras. One is supporting Al Ahly, which is like you were using usually the red shirt, and the other is a white shirt. They call the White Knights. White Knights is the name of the other big body of ultras. Ultras like being the sort of really activists, football fans. But in the past, they only showed interest only in football. So they didn't have any, they wouldn't share, they wouldn't participate in political demonstrations or anything like that. And it was, I think it was very remarkable the way that they started like really getting into the revolution from day one. That these ultras were always mistreated by the police in a way, or at least had some confrontations with the police. So to engage these ultras, the day of January 25th used to be the police day. So this is like the day was a, you know, this kind of a, you know, holiday, national holiday for police day. So setting January 25th as a day for the demonstrations as a police day had symbolic meanings, that the activists always, the political activists always like has this sort of confrontations with the police, and the police gradually saw its role from one to protect the people to one to protect the regime. And in fact, so in a way we had this really public image of the police like being really deteriorated. This was also manifested in the sort of the creed of the police. So before we had the police would have, its creed is the police in service of the people. And then suddenly they decided to change that creed is the police and the people in the service of the law. So that's like, you know, that was like kind of, you know, but that it just reflects, you know, that the police doesn't want to be in service of the people anymore. It's in the service of the law. And what's the law? It's the law supposed to be also serving the people. You know, people should abide by the law, but the law is there to serve the people, to, you know, achieve, you know, goals of the people and goals of a prosperous society and a safe society. So these like small things that show that the police has sort of rethought its role from one of servant to the people to one is like, you know, imposing the will of the regime on the people. And over the years, it started like paying less and less attention to things like security issues of the people, to becoming always just guardian of the regime. So you have like, whenever, you know, an important, like the president or somebody like going, you find masses of the police in the streets protecting here and there. And so you only see the police when they're trying to sort of crush some or cordon some activist or some demonstration or some right. So that made sense to the, you know, to have that day as, you know, January 25th as a day where we have the demonstration. And this was not the first year. So in previous years there has been calls also to have, you know, on January 25th to, you know, have this sort of protest and demanding the removal of the Ministry of Interior, you know, that somebody, people saw as responsible for torture, and there has been, you know, part of the activists' efforts was to expose cases of police brutality and torture in police departments and so on, and became like much facilitated by having this sort of mobile cameras, so people would capture some of these images in police stations and post them online. So having chosen that the police, you know, day as a day of the demonstrations, then and the ultras, they also had, you know, their share of being, you know, sort of in a way brutalized by the police or whatever, or controlled or manipulated by the police. So that, I think, they found, you know, it's like kind of a common cause for a while. And then they joined the revolution. Then I think there was that movement, the ultras movement, saw a fundamental shift in its purpose. So they became really, you know, some of the core elements of the revolution, and adopting and embracing the demands of the revolution for freedom, democracy, social justice, human dignity, and so on. And they became a very important part of the revolution. So again, that's almost exactly the same topic we were talking about before. So in order now, we want to punish all factions of the revolution. So now we'll come to the ultras. How can we, you know, get the ultras? So we stage, you know, some sort of feud between two different factions of ultras, and then we
Throw the police into the mix.
No, actually, what they do is like get some hired thugs in the middle, and then they go and actually kill people. So this is almost like a death squad. So they go in the middle. So it's a normal feud. Usually these feuds are, okay, these feuds happen. You see it everywhere.
Yeah.
But then inject in the middle this element of thugs who are trained killers, and ask them to finish the job.
And it escalates the level of conflict to a whole new
Absolutely, and this has been seen not just in this instance, it's been seen in many other instances. One of them is also Maspero, the one you're probably mentioning is where you had like lots of Christians were slaughtered. Some of them were slaughtered, in fact, they were crushed by armored vehicles. But the whole thing also started almost in the same way. So you have a peaceful demonstration of Christians objecting to something happened in Aswan. So it's just a peaceful demonstration. Nothing big. And they're going, to Maspero, where the TV building, the state-owned TV building is. Then you inject, some thugs who start shooting at both sides, starting this sort of cycle of violence on both sides. And then before you know it, you have, you have this sort of many people killed. And then the army would come and say, oh, but the demonstrators came and attacked us. But obviously, so these are planned operations. This is almost black operations, black ops, which are can only be executed with a certain branch, of security forces who are master these techniques of trying to cause maximum fatalities in a group of either peaceful demonstrators or football fans or so. So it's to me it's the same. It is the same. It's the same with the NGOs, with 6th of April, with the Baradei, with the socialists, with the anarchists, with the Al-Ghad party. With all of these people have been demonized one way or another, and they're trying to isolate them and then try to sort of retaliate and get like sort of kill some of the heads of these and some of the leaders and activists in these organizations, or trying to neutralize them one way or another. So it, to me, is one and the same.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Well, thank you so much for your time. I don't want to monopolize it. I know you have another talk a bit later today. But yes, thank you for taking some time to answer our questions. We appreciate it.